So right now, 47% are actually, human-only tasks. So only humans can perform those. About 30% can be done with humans with AI augmenting their capabilities so that they can do more. And then about 21% is automatable. So in the sense that AI can do it on its own. Their prediction, now this goes across job roles, is that by 2030, it's pretty much going to be a third, a third, a third. So 33% being human only, 33% being, augmented AI plus human, and 33% being automated. And, of course, some job roles are going to be impacted more than others. There are some job roles that are going to go away. There's been estimates that probably about a third of US's workforce is going to need to actually change occupations by 2030, just because of some of the job roles going away.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for all stakeholders. Today, we're going to talk about two of my favorite topics: the evolving role of AI tools in employee selection and the move towards skills-based hiring. And for that conversation, I'm joined today by Dr. Leslie Thomas. Leslie is the Chief Psychometric Officer for Criterion, a testing and credentialing company that helps organizations validate professional skills and competencies. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Leslie.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
So let's start with your title. You're the Chief Psychometric Officer for Criterion. I'm the Chief Psychedelic Officer for Imperative. I think they're probably different. So what does a Chief Psychometric Officer do?
A chief psychometric officer. So psychometrics is actually a little known branch of psychology, and it deals with the measurement of psychological variables, knowledge, skills, abilities, personality, and so forth. And again, it's one of those areas that most people haven't heard of, including my family and most of my friends. But it's likely touched your life in the sense that, if you've taken a driver's license test, a personality inventory, admissions exam to college or to the military, most likely it's highly likely that a psychometrician was involved in that. So we're essentially experts in how do you design tests that provide meaningful scores that are reliable and also fair.
And so for a company like Criterion that designs those, you're kind of a big deal.
Well, I head up a team. I
Yeah.
head up a team that what we do is we work with our clients. We're specifically into credentialing. So when I started my career, my degree actually is in business psychology, and I really wanted to help people. I started off working with organizations to help them hire the right person. So I did a lot of pre-employment testing,
Mm-hmm.
and I really saw the power of assessments and what they can bring to the job,
Right.
and also to really help employees and employers. But I also, while I liked working with the employers to find the right people, I went into psychology because I really wanted to help the employees. And that's where I really got interested on the credentialing side of things because, if you develop a solid certification program, for instance, you can help thousands of people potentially prove that they got the skills needed for a job. And that's going to help them get a job, earn more money potentially, advance their career, or even switch careers. So I love what I do because it really has a much bigger impact on people's lives, and it's a great thing.
And the other thing that's having a big impact on our work lives and probably our personal lives too is AI. And let's kind of start with framing the role of AI in HR, because back in November 2022, when ChatGPT was first rolled out, um, I first heard Tim Sackett say it, but then it became commonplace to hear that you're not going to lose your job to AI, you're going to lose your job to someone using AI. And at the time, I thought that's probably true. That makes sense. We're
Mhm.
overreacting. And I'm a quick embracer. I mean, I'm an early adopter of so many things, and I've wasted so much money on technology that didn't work. But what we've seen, I think, in the last 3 years is that while AI really doesn't take completely some jobs, like my accountant isn't going away anytime soon, but it can take those tasks that are part of that role and aggregate them so much that what the human has to do who's in that role is really different.
Mhm.
And I mean, certainly some jobs are just going away because we won't need somebody to turn, to push this button anymore. But I think a lot of jobs are just going to need a lot less human effort. Is that a fair assessment from your perspective?
Yes, very much so. It's interesting. I mean, for most of our history, job roles have remained pretty stable. What attorneys do, or customer service people, or even software developers. I mean, technology would impact it, but generally what they did remained the same. The thing with, especially with the unprecedented pace of AI evolution that we're seeing right now, is it's really changing the nature of work and the job role. So, one of the reports I like to look at is the World Economic Forum's. They've got a 2025 jobs report that they put out, and they interview thousands of employers, with millions of employees across about 55 countries, I think. So right now 47% are actually human only tasks, so only humans can perform those.
Hmm.
About 30% can be done with humans, with AI augmenting their capabilities so that they can do more. And then about 21% is automatable, so in the sense that AI can do it on its own. Their prediction, now this goes across job roles, is that by 2030, it's pretty much going to be a third, a third, a third. So
Wow.
33% being human only, 33% being, augmented AI plus human, and 33% being automated. And, of course, some job roles are going to be impacted more than others. There are some job roles that are going to go away. There's been estimates that probably about a third of US's workforce is going to need to actually change occupations by 2030, just because of some of the job roles going away. But what's going to happen to most people is that what they're doing is going to change. So in order for companies really to leverage AI, they're going to have to redesign job roles on a pretty consistent basis, and determine, what again are the human only tasks, those that can be done with AI and those that can be automated. And I often even encourage people to, put your job description in one of these large language models and have it give you an estimate. So you kind of have an idea of what tasks and what areas you might want to lean more into. So because
Yeah.
of that, Mhm.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go.
And I was going to say, because the job roles are going to be continually changing, the nature of what they're doing, employers are going to have more of a skills based approach in terms of their hiring and also their training. So that's going to be a necessity.
Because this is really going to change job descriptions. I mean, right now, you write a job description, your hiring manager or your supervisor writes a job description, hands it to HR. We make sure the ADA language is in there and stick it on a shelf someplace. And then when we need to post that job, we take that and abstract it out to a job posting. But if we're not hiring for somebody to necessarily in 5 years be able to do the same tasks that they're doing right, that we're hiring for right now, and we don't want to keep every time the job changes, turn that person over.
Mhm.
So this is going to change how we hire. So what is it going to look like to recruit or promote people based on skills that we need them to be able to do right now that they may not have to do in tasks that they may not have to do in 18 months? How does this change how we hire and select people?
I mean, I think it's really it's looking at people, that are adaptable, that really, want to continually learn and are really invested in lifelong learning. Um, One of the things we do at Criterion is we work with organizations to develop certification programs. And certification programs have maintenance or renewal requirements, meaning that it's not one and done when you get certified. You have continuing education requirements that you
Mhm.
have to have, or you might need to get recertified on a periodic basis. And they do this to make sure that over time you maintain your level of competence, even as the profession or technology changes or impacts it. And so, that's one of the things that, I like to say is, when someone is certified and they've maintained that certification over time, it helps give employers a good signal that that person is more invested in, lifelong learning and keeping their skills up to date.
And, certainly a lot of our audience have HR certifications through HRCI or through SHRM. And largely you get to pick what avenues you pursue as far as your continuing education, and you can do it the hard way, and or you can, there are plenty of things you can watch that'll just, spit out research credits for you. And I mean, this dumb podcast that I do every week is pre-approved, and I do everything, audience, to make sure it's valuable and educational. And but I mean, there are ways to kind of game the system if you wanted to. So as an employer, when you're looking at those, and you've got, let's say we've got a certification, should we be targeting and directing employees down certain paths of of continuing education for their certification, even if they've got more options open? Or are we looking at smaller certifications that are really targeted, like, specifics of payroll in domestic United States or something like that?
I think now at this point where most programs are at, it would probably, if an employer has certain skills that they want the person to, focus on, then it would be helpful to try to direct them toward, any sort of continuing education type of thing that would be helpful. Also a lot of the certification programs, also the test sponsors themselves have created microcredential programs. So they'll use these sometimes afterwards for the maintenance process, recertification process. And what these microcredentials do is they're more narrowly focused. They oftentimes are, training and assessment, although sometimes they're just assessment and they direct you to training resources. But they tend to be, more specialized and can also help supplement, what the person is certified in, to help, focus them more in a specific area that an employer is interested in. I do think, though, in the future that certification programs themselves and the exams themselves are going to need to be more modular, so that they can be mixed and matched to meet an organization's specific needs, and also so that they really focus on specific tasks and related skills, so that it's more customizable for a particular organization, because each organization is going to roll out AI at a different pace and different technology or different way of using it. And this is kind of a really progressive idea in our industry, but it's interesting. I'm doing a presentation in November with a partner from Deloitte, and the studies that they've done also support this idea that organizations are going to be rolling these technologies out at very different paces and in different ways. And so, in order to measure skills that matter to these employers, these programs are going to likely need to go on create a more modular basis. So instead of having one big long, certification exam, a couple exams, you might have, more narrowly focused exams that get stacked together, and can be, potentially mixed and matched
Mm-hmm.
into an organization.
Well, and that would make sense. I mean, an HR generalist in a small manufacturing company with 30 employees has a very different role than an HR generalist or business partner in a corporate entity that, that's, a big, one of the big accounting firms or something like that. And so what I need from somebody in one role may be very different. And then than in another, so stacking those kind of things. Before we get away totally from AI, though, you mentioned that 30-30-30, that they're saying that in the near future 30% of jobs will be human exclusive, 30 will be human plus AI, and 30 will be just AI will do those tasks. um do you have any insight into how do you decide what's safe, what kind of tasks are safe or appropriate for AI replacement versus AI augmentation versus no, a human just needs to do this?
Okay. Well, and just to be clear, what the World Economic Forum is, they're saying like your job role, and they're creating kind of this generic job role
Mhm.
based on a survey. They're saying, 33% of your job is going to be, human only that you can do. 33% of the job tasks will require, augmented by AI, or you'll use AI. And then 33%. So it's kind of they're basically looking at job roles and saying this is the percentage. But as far as job roles are areas that seem to be more safe, so to speak. It's interesting. One of the areas is the skilled trades. So I had a friend of mine that was talking about her son wanting to go into more of a skilled trade like plumbing or electrical, and I said to her, I said I would really encourage that, because anything that really requires physical dexterity is going to be less impacted by artificial intelligence. Also, anything that really requires a certain level of trust and human connection, those areas are going to also be, more less impacted, so to speak. So, we've seen a big increase, I think, in the number of people that are in social sciences, therapists, social services,
Hmm.
those types of things. Also are going to be more slowly impacted, over time. And then, of course, if you get into something where you're actually, helping implement or use AI, so, AI engineers, machine learning, all those things, those are very, very hot roles. The areas that are going to be most impacted are those that have a lot of routine, predictable tasks.
Hmm.
So if you look at things like customer service roles, we see it in routine in retail and hospitality. More and more of the people are, checkouts, self checkouts being used. Also, some of the more entry level tasks that don't require as much domain expertise.
Hmm.
So I think it was Dario Modi had said a couple months ago that he thinks by, I think, 2030, so 5 years, that about 50% of the entry level white collar jobs may go away. Now, there's a lot of disagreement, if that's, it's controversy around that. But his point being is, even in the software development side of things, AI is very good at coding. So, it's one of those areas of, how do we on ramp people and get people more experience in that domain expertise if AI can do a lot of the, entry level stuff. And so that's a big conversation, across a lot of industries right now.
Yeah, and I've definitely had that conversation with employers and at conferences where I'm speaking because AI is for somebody who owns a background screening company. I most of my presentations have nothing to do with background screening. It's most of the HR side of my world, but and AI is since I did my first presentation in early 2023 on AI. That's pretty much all in. That's half the presentations. That's what people want to talk about. But as I've talked to employers about kind of struggling with this issue, if we automate all these entry level jobs, these fresh grads or just the emerging workforce, how are they going to get the skills that we need to take them to the next level? And I think, smart employers are going to have to say, yeah, we could just have this job completely done by AI, and just recruit people from outside at some level to do the next job. To do the next level role. But I think what the smart employers are going to say is we need to bring in these young workers, acculturate them, get them into our system, even if it means less efficiency in the short term, because we need them to be really effective when they get to that skill set that can't be replicated, and it's, whether it's empathy, the ability to actually sell, or like you say, if they have to turn a screw or something like that, they're going to need but they still need these other skills. They're going to have to just invest in that, just like you would mentoring. I mean, maybe that's what you're going to look at it. Okay, if you want to work for this, in this company that's best in class, you're going to come in and we're going to make this investment in you over a period of time, doing what, working alongside the technology, doing basically what technology could do, but we want you to understand how to get the answers, how to show your work in the math.
Yeah, I agree. It's, we want to make sure employers aren't short-term focused, that they're
Mhm.
building that bench strength that's so important. And there's also the other argument out there that, a lot of people that are coming out are AI natives, so to speak, that they really, they pick it up very quickly and they use it. So, it's going to be interesting, but there have been some statistics showing that, there has definitely been a decrease in some of those entry level positions. And I just really hope that employers do think about, like you're saying, they need to think more long term, because you don't get deep domain expertise without that level of experience. And that's the thing that's really important in a lot of these fields.
And so our traditional hiring process is, you post a job, and it's got a job description. Hopefully you've written it well enough that the job posting attracts the people who have the skills and the behaviors that you're looking for to do that work, and turns off the people who think they'd be interested in that role but don't have the behaviors, and they realize this isn't what I want to do with the rest of my life or the next 40 hours a week for some period of time. But when we go to skills based hiring, it's going to change. So how does recruiting, attracting talent, and then selecting it, when you start to use, evaluate micro certifications or any of these other kinds of things, how is it really going to change the hiring process?
Well, it's interesting. The skills-based hiring, actually, a number of organizations have started using this even before the large language model ChatGPT was rolled out in November 2022. Some of your larger organizations, so especially such as Google, IBM, I think Apple, Accenture, and so forth, um, you know, moved to skills-based hiring. They stopped requiring four-year degrees because they realized that degree inflation was, was creating an artificial barrier to people that were otherwise quite capable, and so they wanted to increase their talent pool. And so they've started using the skills-based hiring. I think from a recruiting and from a hiring perspective, the thing is we'll be looking at assessments that are more skills based, and that's why I mentioned earlier certifications. What certifications do is they validate skills, and they're developed by test sponsors who either they are experts in a particular profession, whether it be legal or medical, something along those lines, or they are the developers of the technology that's being used. So, like Google has got a lot of certifications on its AI tools, and because these certifications still tend to be kind of the gold standard out there. There are certain professional best practices that we have to follow when we're developing them to make sure that they're psychometrically sound, meaning that the scores are meaningful, they're reliable, and they're fair.
Hmm.
Also, when we deliver these certifications, they should be proctored. They check the ID of the person to make sure that the person sitting for the exam is the same one that's earning the credential. And they also have that renewal requirement or maintenance or continuing education requirement that I mentioned earlier to ensure somebody maintains that over time. So, I would definitely encourage employers to look at that as one of the areas to help out with their skills-based hiring. The other thing that's important is to verify that people have those credentials. So, what you're saying earlier is that, there are a lot of different, micro credentials, micro certifications. There's lots of different credentials. Credentialing actually is an umbrella term. So it includes, diplomas, degrees, certification, licensure, micro credentials, certificate programs. And one of the things that employers can do is, one, go to the test sponsor. Usually they'll have a portal that they can verify the person actually has the
Hmm.
certification that they say they do. Also make sure that it's up to date, because that helps signal that the person has a commitment to stay ahead of the curve in their profession, so to speak. And then also there's digital badging platforms that are out there. And one of the nice things about these platforms is they contain metadata that an employer can look at. So it'll tell you for the different credentials that a candidate has, what it took to actually earn that credential. So not all credentials are created equally. Somebody might have just gone through a one-day course and then they got an end of course assessment type of thing, versus somebody going through a certification program and doing everything needed to do that, is a very different level of measurement. So these digital badging platforms can be really helpful. I think also in the future, these metadata, will be used. We'll use AI, and we may already, in some instances, be using AI to help employers make more sense of these metadata, to pull it together and help create, a better profile of the people that are applying for a particular job.
What about the actual process of verifying the competency? Somebody's got a piece of paper or the digital badge or whatever says they've got this. I mean, I have met people with HR certifications with the word senior in them who couldn't HR their way out of a paper bag. And so, what about do you think employers, if we go this route, are going to need to do more competency assessment during the selection process?
Yes, also more verification, just because, I think, there's great parts of using AI, and then there's some downsides to it. And so I'm sure, like all of you that are listening, I've received resumes where it was obviously written by AI, and there's stuff in there that I'm like, I don't really know if that's actually true. In fact, it was one I received, which was really funny because you could see at the end where the large language model had said, this is what this does, and blah, blah, blah. They forgot to actually delete it at the end
Oh,
of
yeah.
the resume. And so, and because also AI allows people to send out so many applications and apply to so many jobs,
Yeah, it's
um,
murdering a lot of HR offices
it
right now, yeah.
really is. I think we're going to need to come up with an AI solution to help sift through those things. But, and, doing more competency assessment. One of the things that we're looking at in our industry is, how do we incorporate AI into the exam development process to develop certification exams more quickly, because we know that job skills are going to change. And then also, how can we use AI to help us assess some of these competencies more effectively? So using things like, an AI chatbot to the speech to text, for instance, to do a role play with a potential candidate to assess communication skills and those types of things. So we're also looking at how can we how can we use AI to help us better assess some of these competencies. And it's interesting the advances that have happened with these models. When I'm on an industry committee that is written some papers on, how do you use AI in exam development. And when I first started off, there were other psychometricians and people on the committee that I think were, pretty skeptical, and I was it too as well, based on where these large language models are, or were at that time rather. And it's pretty amazing of how far they've come along to the point that now we can automate much of that process, or we're in the process of automating much of that exam development process. And also, as I said, realizing that we really can use AI to help us, build better assessments and really innovate in the industry.
And if the use of AI is going to be a critical skill, and resilience, the ability to change how you do things, but understanding also just where it's appropriate, where it's not, and how to leverage it. What does that competency look like? How do you measure that? What kind of behaviors do you think are going to be help people be most successful in actually using AI in whatever role they're in, even if they're not in a technical role?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. There are a lot of experts out there, and I agree with them, that are saying that it's not necessarily going to be the most intelligent person, so to speak, that's going to get ahead. It's the most adaptable person.
Okay.
So it's that person that really is willing to learn new skills and just be able to adapt as things change. And so I think one of the things I know within our industry that some of us are looking at, and just in assessment industry in general, is this idea of measuring some of these more what we call durable skills. So things like looking at communication skills, but with AI, you're going to have a lot more team-based type of work. So, setting up a simulation of a team environment and looking at how people communicate, how they collaborate, and how they work with each other. And so, really trying to figure out, how can we assess people and how they're using AI and if they're using it effectively, and also looking at some of those skills that we call them durable skills because they tend to remain stable
Mhm.
over time. And so, regardless of what technical skills are required, and as AI evolves, these are some of the really important skills that are going to be important in the future. And these, traditionally we call them their human-centric skills.
Mhm. We
In
used to
fact,
call them soft skills, but they're the
skills,
hard ones, and I don't,
right?
I call them power skills a lot because I think
Power
those are
skills.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The technical skills a lot they'll call in some areas disposable skills, and what they mean
Mm,
by that is they have a pretty short shelf life. The durable skills or soft skills, those are the ones. In fact, the World Economic Forum report that I mentioned earlier, the jobs report, It's really interesting because the top 5 skills, one, critical thinking or analytical thinking is number one, and that's been number one for years.
Mhm.
Also, leadership, influence, communication, adaptability, all these types of durable or soft skills that we talk about. And I think number 6 is actually technical literacy.
Right.
So, it's really the human centric skills, that are going to become more important as technology is able to do more of the technical stuff.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. I started Imperative 26 years ago, and if I'm honest, I've struggled for all of that time to really figure out how to explain how Imperative is different than most of the rest of the background screening industry. And if you've listened to very many of these commercials, you've heard a lot of that, and you've heard how you kind of stumble through trying to do that. But what I can tell you is who our typical client is. They're generally privately owned businesses that really invest in the processes and time to make good hiring decisions. Sometimes that's related to their industry, but more often it's related to their personality or their organizational culture. They're the kind of leaders who want to check all the boxes to make sure that every person on their team is in the right seat and that they're not bringing knuckleheads into the organization who are just going to get in the way of success. And unfortunately, sometimes they come to us after something's gone seriously wrong and their employment law attorney or their HR consultant tells them, hey, call Mike Coffey and avoid this in the future. But wherever you're at, as always, we're ready to help. You can learn more at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 3/4 of a recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Recert Credits. Then select episode 224 and enter the keyword credential. That's CREDENTIAL. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Dr. Leslie Thomas. It's interesting you say that. I am chair of the talent committee for the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, and we just did a big survey this summer to employers here in Fort Worth, basically asking what are the skills that make people most successful in your organization. And we had everything, communication, conflict resolution, job specific, technical skills, industry knowledge, all the whole list of things. And the first 6 most important things were all what we would call soft skills or power skills: communication, conflict resolution, collaboration, those kinds of things, self-initiation. And then like number 6 or 7 on the list was job specific skills. And then in our follow-up conversations with employers, it's like they were like, if people have the basic cognitive ability, we can train them to do most jobs. But what we can't train them, what we don't have the time to train them in, is communication, collaboration, conflict. If they don't come in with that, you know, we don't have the ability to do it. And so that's one of the things we're looking at the chamber, is because the employers also said those most important skills are also the ones that their own labor force is missing, and that the larger available workforce is missing. And so we have I have, as chair, have put us in this awkward position now of saying, hey, we want to identify what your biggest problem is and help you solve it. And now we're like, how do we do this? And so if you've got any insight there, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it is. There are different types of tests that measure some of those, the more soft skills. They're more difficult to measure because they also are more difficult for us to define. So what do we mean by leadership? Those types of things. So, some of it can be very specific to a company, in terms of how they define leadership. But there are a number of exams or tests that are out there that assess more of these durable skills. that are available. And, the other thing we're looking at is, again, how do we incorporate those skills into, using the technology? So, making them context specific, in terms of that assessment process. It is interesting what you said, as far as, those being the top things, because there used to be a saying, I don't know if it's still really said, but it would say basically, you hire on skills and you fire on fit. And a lot of the fit issues would go back to, teamwork, team collaboration, communication, initiative, those types of traits, so to speak. And so, it's a very important component of the work.
Yeah, and I think it's really flipped. And I mean, the reason we were firing for fit was because we weren't doing a good job on the front end, and I think it, no matter, and we've all dealt with that amazing salesperson who wreaks havoc in the organization and costs us more than they bring in just because of the headaches, or that engineer who can't communicate and causes problem. All those, we've all dealt with them, but we get so eager sometimes just to put a competent warm butt in a seat, and that we struggle too much down the road trying to do that. And I think a lot of employers have figured that out, but unfortunately there's still a certain level of management out there that's how they got their job, and that's what they still value. And so I think they're having to we're going to have to reevaluate that, and it may be hit or miss. But you mentioned validation on these assessments, and large corporations will spend a lot of money building these systems out and validating them, and then there's small firms that are sometimes too clever for their own good and will build their own systems. So what are the risks of introducing bias, and whether it's a proctoring system of some sort or an assessment and all of that process, where are the what are the things you need to pay attention to avoid, not even necessarily illegal bias, just bringing in bias into the decision that is not going to help that person really be successful. We all have biases, and I've got a bias for high efficiency and people who are really productive and can do the damn job. But how do for the biases for the things that don't help us be successful, how do you protect against those?
That's a great question. I would say on the hiring side, it's tough because a lot of people think that they are great interviewers, and go by their gut.
Right.
And when I used to work on these systems, when I was working on the more the hiring side, I would always, make sure that they had a list. First sit down and what do you want this person to do? What's really important for them to, from a soft skills perspective, and also from a technical skills perspective. And one of the things I also always found interesting and it's valuable a lot of times is to have your team sit down and talk about those things too, to make sure you're in agreement or alignment on that,
Hmm.
because oftentimes you're not. So it's good to find out and align on those types of things, and then actually develop interview questions that will help you assess some of those things. So a lot of times organizations will give situational judgment tests or personality tests and those types of things, and they'll give kind of a battery of tests, and that'll give you a lot of great information for when you get to the interview. And so if you know what you're really looking for in the interview and what you're trying to really assess with a person, and you have a standardized way of doing it, and there's
Hmm.
obviously also better ways of writing interview questions than others, that helps mitigate some of that bias. And also if you have a couple people that are doing the interview, if it's an important position, and comparing notes with that is really important. But it is one of the challenges. I've met a lot of, especially executives or, that, are very sure of what they're looking for. If
Right.
I see this profile on a personality, this is what we're doing. Sort of thing. And, so again, the more standardized and objective you can make it before you meet the person, and ideally have a couple people interview and then compare notes, the more you'll help mitigate bias.
Yeah, I always talk about, we've all had hiring managers who think they have this unique insight into the human soul. And, but when you see people with almost identical circumstances about what they want to judge them about, but different backgrounds that the other person can relate to, the other biases kick in, and, and, oh, I can relate to this person. And, oh, well, and they overlook the things. So if I'm designing systems to assess competencies and things like that, what kind are there specific things that uh, go into planning those kind of assessments? The actual real competencies or behavioral competencies or whatever, apart from human judgment stuff, to avoid bias. Because I know the EEOC is looking at this, and that's always their concern. So how do we make sure that, I guess, first, that we're really just testing for the right thing, and that the test we're using is really valid for that.
Is the right yeah, so one of the things is always ask for the validation report. So ensure that they've done sort of a validation report to show that performance on that test is, predictive of job performance, or is related to job performance. And when you're looking at a technical report, this is generally what industrial organizational psychologists do. They're the kind of the experts in terms of helping to evaluate those technical reports to make sure that it fits. Because normally they'll look at the job, perhaps do what we call a job analysis, or look at the job description, and then make sure that what they did in the technical validation report actually is acceptable for what your uses are. So it takes a certain level of expertise. I would say if the vendor that has the assessments isn't willing to give you the technical reports, that can be a flag. But really trying to read through and understand and interpret them, you're probably going to need somebody with some expertise, like a psychometrician or industrial organizational psychologist, to help you kind of understand it.
And beyond just the validation that it measures the thing it says it measures, how much does inserting that person into a specific organizational culture change the validity of the test? What we're looking for, and maybe this it's not the case, but um, is it when we say that we want this skill set, this behavior set, let's make it a behavioral thing. Um, and we say a salesperson's got to have these behaviors. This is a really good profile for a salesperson, but in a different organization, maybe that's not the right behavior set for how important is organizational culture, or measuring, adjusting it for organizational culture.
Yeah, I mean, it organizations, it will definitely vary. So I'll look at something like, for customer service. Some organizations are the customer is always right, and other organizations are like making a profit is more important. So culture is definitely important, for what you're looking at. So you may still be looking for some of the same, say if you're looking at personality or something along those lines, some of the same traits, but it may not be as important in that position. I'm not answering this very well.
No, no, I think you're on you're saying you're answering the very vague, weird question I asked, just because it popped
Yeah.
in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, because what I used to do in my consulting was, when we would have, say, we'd have a situational judgment test, we would actually work with the organization to make it, customize it for that organization, because that culture is often very different within companies, and so actually customizing the scoring so that it actually fits that culture a lot of times is the best way to go.
Yeah. Well, in fact, one of my HR certifications, a lot of it was situational. And I'd been in HR 30 years at that point. And as I'm going through it, I'm like, I know what the answer they want me to give here is, but there are so many things, that variables that they're not talking about, that would drive me in a completely different direction. I know what the textbook answer is, and that's what I'm going to give them. But no, if you don't know how that organization operates, what their tolerance for risk is, what their past history with these kind of problems are, all those things, I'm that's I the situational, this just generic situational judgment thing always makes me really nervous.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the areas in assessment that a good assessment of personality, inventory, for instance, will have some sort of impression management scale in there to try to detect if you're trying to answer it in a certain way to, fit your idea of a particular role. But it is one of those things with personality inventories in particular, even situational judgment tests where, depending on how well they're developed and who developed them, some are more, fakeable, so to speak, than
Mhm.
others. And also, with personality inventories, typically if it's something off the shelf, it's going to measure, five or whatever traits that it's measuring, or maybe more. But it's also a question of, are those things important for your particular job role that you're measuring on, or is there something else that's more important? So, you need to really look at it, at the job role level to figure out, what really makes sense, and also, as you said, take culture into play with that as well.
Well, you've been so generous with your time. I've got one last question. If we look, what do you think in 5 years
Hmm.
with AI, all the stuff that's happening with micro credentialing, this move to skills based hiring? Um, I don't want to even get into what this is going to mean for colleges' endowment funds, because I think the sleeping giants who are going to get killed here are a lot of the 4 year programs. But um, what do you think the ecosystem is going to look like for evaluating fit for a role in 5 years?
Yeah, I think in fact it's so hard. It's difficult to predict because the technology is evolving so quickly. But I think that we're going to get much, much better. There, as far as looking at personality and fit and those types of things, the more data that we get, and if we're using machine learning and so forth, we can get a much better idea for things than we have before. So I think we'll be, much better at figuring out like if somebody's a fit for a particular role. I think also assessment is going to look very different, what we assess and how we assess it. So for instance, I think there'll be, what we call kind of still skills stealth assessment or in work assessment, where employees will actually be assessed behind the scenes. And I think in a lot of instances, it's going to be used much more, for a developmental purposes to try and figure out where somebody is at, and then, identify training that they need. It's going to be built much more into the platforms too to help upskill people, in real time. So you're going to have much more just-in-time testing and just-in-time training, personalized. Job roles is just, it's really difficult to predict, what exactly we're going to need from a job role perspective, and just because AI is evolving so quickly.
Yeah, and I can see systems, if there are systems that can read every email you write in the network, every document you save, every report you write, identifying things like high performers, or high potential, future leaders, those kind of folks, figure, and maybe across the organization, being in a situation where, hey, Mike is over here in HR, but Mike really ought to be in sales. I mean, he's got, when we look at that, we should target Mike and say, hey, Mike, would you be interested in spending a rotation in sales and learning that and seeing how that fits? Things that cross silos that maybe we don't even see today because nobody in HR is, talking to Mike about, and Mike's never thought about sales.
Right, right. They're actually doing, a number of organizations are doing work like that, where they're looking at job roles that are likely going to go away, and then trying to figure out what are some transferable skills and what, newer job roles they might map to.
Mhm.
And it's pretty interesting work. And I do think, following on what you're saying, is, there's going to be more, measurement going on while people work. Like I said, in the background when they do things, it'll look at productivity, how you're spending your time and those types of things. And, it also, it's going to probably evaluate, who knows, emails and things like that
Mhm.
to try and see how you're communicating. All right, you need help with your communication skills. So, I mean, there's really a lot that we can really do to personalize things, to recommend, training, to assess people and to help them if they want to go in a different, different direction to help them get there. I think it's really going to be seamless. It's going to be kind of built into the system or into the platforms, at least for a number of job roles, especially for technology job roles. I think that's going to be the case.
But you look at how many, every time you get on a Teams or a Zoom meeting, all these AI note takers pop up. They're capturing what everybody in the organization in the meeting is saying. that information is going someplace. And that how long before a company can say, okay, 40% of this meeting was wasted time. This is the guy that caused most of that wasted time. Let's, we got to zero in on him. And I think personally, I think transparency with AI is critical. If you address an issue that AI identified, even if it's valid, and you show up and talk to somebody after the fact and explain how they, people are going to be pissed. I mean, you've got to tell them in advance that, hey, this is how we're going to use this tool. That's my take anyway.
Yes, it's interesting. I'm on a AI committee within the industry, and one of the things we did a paper on responsible use of AI and assessment.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the same principles apply to any time you're using AI, and basically it's that transparency, making sure people know how it's being used, why it's being used, when it's being used. There are also a lot of regulations out there, related to that. So making sure organizations are in compliance with it. Privacy is a huge issue when it comes to AI and how that's going to work. So I think that it's going to be an interesting ride as we go into the future, because I can definitely see employers doing some of that, but they're going to have to be very, very careful. Like you said, be very transparent and upfront about it. Use it for developmental purposes, and make sure employees are going to sign off. And so that'll be kind of the big question.
Well, that was my French goodbye, but that we are well past time. Thank you so much, Leslie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please write us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. And then share this episode on your favorite social media platform. It really does help people find us. And we'd love to hear your thoughts at goodmorninghr.com. Good Morning HR is produced by Marianne Hernandez and Paco Corral on Imperative's marketing team. The Good Morning HR theme music was created by Steve Pegler at HR Strategies of Texas. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.